Alright guys, so no beating around the bush, we're going to be following up on the Ashes Ace strength ranking, with this one being the subjective version. If you weren't here for the last ranking, basically, that one was about ranking them on their objective feats and objective feats alone. With the subjective ranking, I'll still try to use some path of logic, but for some of y'all's favorites that weren't ranked higher than you'd like, this might be the preferred version. The smart plan would be to just immediately edit using the recorded script I had already made for part 2, as this was originally supposed to be one whole video. Instead, I decided to rewrite the script by cutting out what would be deemed unnecessary, along with adding things that would better explain my logic. That way, this video can be the very best like no one ever was.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
But anyways, without stalling any longer, let's get started. And for this subjective ranking, in order to properly rank the strongest representative of their respective teams, I'm gonna look at them by who is the best at being an ace. And to understand that, here are the common qualifying ace traits. One is defeating the final or second to last gym of a series. Not much need to elaborate, these are just usually Ash's biggest and most important battles before he's ready for the main tournament of a series. Then there's being the last one standing during Ash's second to last or final battle in the main tournament of a series. This trait was very hard to find the right words for, but Ash's last 2 matches in these scenarios are usually his biggest and most important in the entire series altogether. This is because it usually is defined by Ash's battles with the main rival and or boss rival taking place in those rounds. There's a slight bit of bonus qualifying points if Ash loses, but the Ace was Ash's last Pokemon left. The biggest and most important trait that heavily factors in this is how they stack up to Ash's Pikachu, and that is to rival or even surpass Pikachu himself. And I don't mean in some random gym or random league battle where Pikachu's performance can be wishy-washy. I'm referring to Ash's other aces being as strong, if not stronger than a full power Pikachu in real valuable scenarios. But other than that, now let's get to the real ranking. And so at the bottom we have our D tier. I'll warn you right now that the C and D tier are only going to be occupied by one Pokemon each. In fact, they are basically about the same ranking, so I don't think that there will be this massive gap between these two Pokemon, but my reasoning to separate these two Pokemon into different tiers is that the one in C tier has special circumstances that makes me want to put them over the one in D tier. But to not drag this any further, the D tier is what I'd label being a powerhouse, and the only Pokemon that we're going to have here is Sceptile. This at the end of the day is going to be one of 2 of the hottest takes for sure, but out of all the aces, Sceptile really just has the least to work with. Looking at my qualifying ace traits throughout the Hoenn gyms, the Hoenn leagues, the Battle Frontier, and even the Sinnoh League, Sceptile only bears one of these traits, making him the least ace-like in the whole group. The only trait to work with is Sceptile beating Spencer, who while is Ash's third to last opponent among the Battle Frontier, the first 6 is considered its own little group before being ready to face Brandon. This makes Spencer technically Ash's second to last Frontier brain when looking at the regular group. But to circle back to my main point, there's just barely anything left to make him a standout ace. There is Tobias's Darkrai, but there's so many micro issues I have compared to how most people view it. First, I think the Darkrai Sceptile dynamic is very lopsided, with the notable fact that Darkrai faced 3 Pokemon before going against a fresh Sceptile. Looking at the major showdowns with other aces, doesn't have to be a main rivalry or anything, but a lot of the time there will be an even amount of wins between the Pokemon, at most a very small gap if uneven. I know a popular counter argument we like to use is that Dream Eater negated all of Darkrai's prior damage, but it should be noted that energy recovery just doesn't work in the anime like it does in the games, where battle damage can literally be reversed like nothing ever happened. The exact specifics are a little vague, but many examples across the anime show that energy recovery can be ignored / negated or even exploited depending on the situation. A real example of a Pokemon being able to 1v1 Tobias's Pokemon would actually be Pikachu, where Tobias's Latios didn't actually take damage or lose much stamina before going against him. So to summarize Sceptile, while he has the properties of an ace, he suffers greatly by other aces doing more than just the bare minimum. With all things considered, it's no surprise that people believe Sceptile's big biggest and nearly only highlight can easily be replicated by any other ace. This is not Sceptile hate, I promise you, it's just a realistic depiction of how he was written, and with how he was written, he wavers heavily from being an ace to a simple powerhouse. This is also without mentioning his events as a Grovyle, which gets even worse. I wanted to lean away from pre-evolution talks as much as possible, but I'll at least say that some of the others have had qualified traits to be an ace even before they fully evolved, unlike Grovyle. And then getting to the C tier, like said before, this is a special tier for the fact that they're about the same level as D tier, but has unique properties to make me want to separate them. In honor of this fact, I dubbed this tier as the Powerhouse Plus. And then the only Pokemon that we're gonna have here is Krookodile. The reasoning for putting Krookodile above Sceptile for me is the fact that Krookodile has a few more qualifying traits to be an ace. Whether it's the gyms or rivals, even the leagues, Krookodile has the benefit of getting the next best thing after Pikachu. While Pikachu won Ash's last gym of Unova, Krookodile secured the second to last gym as a Krokorok. Flashback to when I said pre-Evo still has some ace traits. While Pikachu beat Ash's main rival and was the last hope for Ash in the Unova League, Krookodile held his ground by securing Ash's final win, which was against Stefan, who's like the second best rival after Trip, and I get that can be seen as pretty tame compared to Sceptiles. So the biggest thing that particularly made me feel the need to make two different tiers is that even if they're mostly the same, Krookodile is more protected as an ace. Ever since becoming a Krookodile, Krookodile has been pretty much undefeated. This largely can be because Krookodile was barely used, but that scarce usage sort of plays into that ace role, being only used when needed. And considering it always worked in his favor, I feel Krookodile is just much less likely to let Ash down and will put in points whenever you see him. But as for why Krookodile is only this low, it's simply because the other aces have done way more for Ash in comparison, having just as much or even more qualifying traits, along with just pretty much just unfathomably better feats in portrayal. And before moving on to the next tier, to factor in the biggest trait on if they rivaled or surpassed Pikachu, these two are the furthest from that. Sceptile throughout AG heavily fell into Pikachu's shadow, and even for his feat in the next series, Pikachu shows him up by doing arguably better. Krookodile shouldn't really need to be explained, as the reason Ash got Krookodile in the first place was because he lost to Pikachu in their old rivalry. In the grand scheme of things, they just look like regular powerhouses when looking at the aces above him. And then getting to the B tier, considering the tiers below this were labeled as a powerhouse, I'd say this tier would be for the borderline aces. They certainly surpass that of a basic powerhouse, and unlike the last two, I consider these Pokemon capable of coming extremely close to matching Pikachu. And then getting to the first ones, we're gonna have both Incineroar / Lycanroc, who are gonna be interchangeable. It's not the biggest talking point, but the divide among the fandom of who was the non-Pikachu ace is surprisingly valid, as both sides make perfect sense. Lycanroc definitely wins in the portrayal department, as he basically has things like being tied to and beating the main rival, winning both the second to last Grand Trial, which could be equivalent to gems, and specifically the Alolan Championship. There's also the hidden achievement among a few aces, and that's being a one-of-a-kind among its race, or species, I guess. With Incineroar having weaker portrayal, with his main thing being rivals with the strongest trainer's ace, he makes up for it by not only having better wins and feats, but being somewhat rivals with Lycanroc. They had some sort of rivalry here and there during Sun and Moon, but what makes it interesting is how they were equalized in this rivalry. To elaborate, like said in the objective ranking, despite losing to Braviary, Lycanroc was able to win that brief clash against Kukui's Incineroar, and it could be argued just like Torracat, Lycanroc could possibly win a 1v1 had he battled at peak performance. Overall, this is kind of like a Zoro Sanji thing to me, where there's just no way I can massively put one above the other. They've just got the same tier no matter what. If I were to choose, Lycanroc would definitely be the better of the two, but on a regular basis, the results could change possibly every day. And then getting to the next and final member of the B tier, we're actually going to have Charizard. This is going to be the second hottest take in the list, but hear me out. To spoil the criteria for the A tier is for the Pokemon I think wouldn't just rival Pikachu, but arguably surpass him depending on the circumstances. Charizard is the perfect Pokemon to show what I mean, because back in the day in their original series, Charizard was undeniably Ash's strongest Pokemon, even including Pikachu. This was very blatant during the Indigo League, and while they kinda let him fall back by letting Pikachu get the spotlight in Orange Islands, they went back to the original portrayal during Johto, winning Ash the final gym, beating the main rival, and being Ash's last fortress standing against the strongest rival so far are all traits that can't be replicated by those below him in the list. But if you really want to know why he's not among the very top, my personal hot take and possibly warped view is that Charizard is just not that special anymore. Again, hear me out. Because he's the first and oldest ace, excluding Pikachu, it's no surprise that a lot of other aces in the future could easily mirror what Charizard did in one way or the other. Some have won Ash's last gym, defeated his main rival, and gave Ash some of his best achievements in his journey. And outside of having his milestone broken, it doesn't help that I too believe that after the original series, Charizard became a lot more down to earth. Maybe not a part of the AG section where he takes down Nolan's Articuno, but definitely around the portion of AG with him getting carried by Bulbasaur and Squirtle. For his biggest highlight of BW facing off against Iris' Dragonite, it definitely feels less special knowing Crocodile did the same thing but even easier not that long before. And lastly, with Journeys, Infernape rivaling him and even seeking out for bigger challenges does present him as a little less desirable. All of these things together really changed my perspective of Charizard in recent years, definitely devolved from being the big bro with even Ash's main partner as he was back then, although not in a bad way I should add. To me, Ash's Charizard is actually the border between A tier and the B tier, to where if Charizard decided that if he had one more in him, he can lock in to match those of the A tier, but majority times, maybe 8 or 9 times out of 10, he's chilled out to be at the top of B. And then getting to the A tier, the name that I'd have for this would be a true ace. Like said before, this is for the aces that can not only rival Pikachu, but depending on certain factors, they could even surpass them given their circumstances. And the first one that we're gonna have in this tier is Infernape. This is a placement that I, funnily enough, had no trouble putting in at all. Infernape has some major qualifying accomplishments like defeating the final and quite frankly, probably the strongest gym leader at the time, along with defeating Ash's main and literal greatest rival at the time as well. And these also have to do with the A tier criteria because both examples involve Infernape defeating a Pokemon that directly took out Pikachu. Granted, one of them has important context for why Pikachu lost the way he did, but looking at the rest of the aces below him, except specifically OS Charizard, none of them has ever done anything like this at an endgame level. Stuff like this is a star example of Ash's aces being one of his strongest Pokemon of all time because they managed to properly fill in the shoes of Ash's real ace and go beyond when needed. I know there's examples like Flint and Tobias where Pikachu is portrayed to be Ash's best Pokemon regardless, but to be fair with the Flint battle, this is like 2 episodes after Monferno evolved and we had no clue what he was capable of yet. With Tobias, you might actually kind of have a point, which is sort of why Infernape's at the bottom of A, as the portrayal between Infernape and Pikachu was kind of back and forth near the end. And also, because of their off-screen battle in Journeys, I thought Infernape being close to Charizard was the best way I can respect both of them. And then getting to the last members of the A tier, this is going to be another interchangeable pair, but we're going to have the Aura duo of Greninja and Lucario. There's quite a few things to list among them separately, but one thing that particularly sets these two at the top is how they both make use of Aura. Being synced to Ash in a way unlike any other led me to believe that not only can Ash bring out their full potential within them, but they too can bring out the full potential within Ash. But there's definitely more than that. So to list their qualifying traits, Greninja defeated the final gym leader of a region, and while Journeys didn't have any gym battles, defeating Raihan was the final PWC opponent before Ash qualified for the Masters 8, which is equivalent enough. Then for the main tournament, Greninja defeated the main rival and was Ash's last hope as he lost in the next round. Lucario only managed to win Ash's second to last match, but it's still a great accomplishment as it was the literal number 2 behind the number 1 trainer in the verse. But a really good argument to have Greninja at the top of A tier is that Greninja is like the modern version of Infernape in original series Charizard, but goes even beyond that. This can be explained by what I listed earlier, but more so how he never puts Pikachu, Ash's real strongest Pokemon, or any other Ashmon over to be better than him during XY. The only exception would be Crocodile, not Krokorok, being similar in BW, but again, it's a lot less to work with, and XYZ is the only series from my knowledge where in official battles, there's never been a moment where Pikachu shows that he can hang with the best of the best. Granted, in two notable examples, he was extremely worn out, but it's very telling that Greninja hogs all the big feats on the team in that series. While it's not my favorite cup of tea in terms of how it was executed, with how he was portrayed, it's understandable why Greninja is still considered, if not the strongest Ash ace ever. And with that being said, the only other Pokemon that I think could surpass Greninja is his very own student. Like said in the objective ranking, Lucario getting beat up by Greninja has a lot of context surrounding it, so the idea that Greninja is canonically much better than a full power and locked in Lucario is something that can be argued but not canonically proven. With Lucario not being blinded by jealousy, making full use of Mega Evolution and Aura, and going on to achieve better feats than Greninja, you can argue that there was a passing of the torch. And as for how Lucario is compared to Pikachu, the latter is still Ash's number one in this series, but there were times where Lucario held his ground. There was the B rivalry, which was an endgame, but still a very important one for Ash's PWC challenge. They also were the only other member in the Journeys team to defeat an ace of the Masters 8 twice, for which beating Cynthia serves as a nice in-between for Pikachu's Masters 8 wins. And as for who's stronger between Lucario and Greninja, personally I would say Lucario, but regardless, it's still a very close match between the Aura duo. And then finally getting to the S tier, this is going to be just as obvious as last time, but the S tier is still going to be for the number one spot. I sort of did a throwaway comment about it last time, but you really could just call this the Monarch level. And that Pokemon that we're going to have here is Pikachu. We all know that Pikachu had several slip-ups across the anime, but when it really mattered, and when I mean really mattered, Pikachu also did carry the most. With the Orange Islands against Drake, against Brennan in the Battle Frontier, Tapu Koko in Alola, and Leon in the Masters 8, the show reminds us all that those achievements undeniably prove that Pikachu is no doubt Ash's greatest Pokemon of all time. Sceptile and Crocodile, not even close. Incineroar, Lycanroc, and Charizard, they can definitely put up a fight, but Pikachu is still on top. Infernape, Greninja, and Lucario, they might actually get him a few times out of 10, but in a one-on-one with everything on the line, always bet on Pikachu. And that is the entire list. Let me know your thoughts on this, especially on how you think this is compared to the objective ranking. Normally, I'd probably have another 10 or 20 seconds to yap about something, but I'm not gonna lie, I really got nothing. So, yeah, make sure y'all have a good one. That's pretty much all I got for now. Yep.
Do it now! Get